All right. Good morning. Good afternoon for some of you. Welcome to IUSA's final webinar of 2025. We thank you for joining us today. Our topic is navigating the EB-5 compliance landscape, and we're very excited to have you here with a wonderful lineup of panelists. Before we get started, I just want to run through my normal disclaimer here to remind you that this presentation is intended for educational purposes only, and it's not legal advice. If you have questions or concerns about the topic, please consult your own legal counsel. And additionally, all of the information in this webinar is deemed to be accurate and up to date as of the time of this discussion. But as we all know, the fast-moving nature of EB-5, if you're listening to this at a later date, things may have changed. Additionally, recording or transcription of this webinar is strictly prohibited. If you are listening to it now live, we will have a recording available, so you'll be able to listen to it again. Just look for an email later today or tomorrow with information about how to access that. Before we get started with the content, I would like to thank JTC for being our webinar sponsor this year. Without them, we would not be able to bring you all of this wonderful programming that we've had throughout the whole year. And I'd like to turn it over to Jill Jones from JTC to let you know a little bit about who JTC is and what they do in the EB-5 space. Jill?
Thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you everyone for joining today. As Ashley mentioned, I am with JTC Group. We are a global fund administrator with jurisdictional expertise, not only by the part of the world you live in, but also by specific niche categories. EB-5 being one that we've been involved in now for going on 15 years. Our foundation and our principles in EB-5 particularly is about having security and transparency. We've been involved with IIUSA for our entire exposure to the EB-5 industry, and we're very pleased to be a participant, especially on the best practices side of the world. We're looking forward to a really great panel today, so I will thank you to the rest of the panelists for joining us, and thank you to IIUSA for allowing us to sponsor these great webinars all year long. It's been a wonderful thing to do, so thank you all.
Thank you, Jill. And now we will go ahead and get started with the meat of today's discussion. And I'm going to turn it over to your moderator, Mariza McKee. But really quick, I just wanted to let all of the attendees know that if you have questions throughout the discussion, that the panelists are willing to take your questions. So use that Q&A box you see at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. Type in your questions as they pop in your head, and then we will get to questions after the discussion towards the end of the webinar. So I will turn it over to your moderator, Mariza McKee now.
Thank you, Ashley, and thanks again to JTC and IIUSA for hosting us and sponsoring us today. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us from around the world. I'm Mariza McKee, and I'm a partner at Kutak, which is a national law firm, and I'm the founder of our EB-5 finance practice. So drawing on, similar to Jill here, almost 15 years of work in EB-5, my focus is on strategy and risk mitigation and writing up all of the transactional documentations for EB-5 deals, which all kind of falls under this umbrella of compliance. So our team is responsible for and guides our clients on compliance with US law, specifically securities laws, and EB-5 program requirements. I also chair IIUSA's Best Practices Committee, and I'm honored to be your moderator today. So our program, Navigating the EB-5 Compliance Landscape, is going to give some inside perspectives today on 956G filings, integrity fees, audits, and then the securities law certification requirement. So to structure our time, we've kind of split this up into 4 parts: report, fund, verify, and certify. So I'm going to go through those just real quick so you know what's coming up ahead. So report, we're just talking about reporting through the form 956G, which essentially captures the business of running a regional center in one annual form. Then second, we've got fund. So that's funding oversight via the integrity fee. So calendar it, make sure you get that paid, and then keep proof of that payment as a core obligation for compliance. Then third, we've got verify. So we're just verifying that the filings match reality through audits, those audits that are required once every 5 years. So building Year-round readiness, strong records, reliable internal controls, and record keeping to be sure you're ready for an audit. And then fourth is certifying. So certifying securities law compliance, and I'll talk about that at the end of our program today, just with a documented program that supports basically what you file in the 956G. So a lot of ground to cover. We hope it's kind of organized in a way that makes sense for you. And I'm just so excited for you to get to spend this hour with our panelists. So we've got a really broad range of perspectives, including 3 leaders from regional centers. We've got Andrew, who formerly served at USCIS. And he's going to share some really rare agency side insight that I think you're all going to enjoy. We've got Kyle, who recently completed an audit and has got the inside scoop on that and hopefully some practical takeaways for all of you. Jill, JTC, of course, brings depth on compliance and audit trails and fund administration, together with Carel and his experience with one of the largest regional centers that's sponsoring lots and lots of JCEs. So we're set for a focused, practice-oriented discussion. As Ashley said, please drop your questions into the Q&A as they occur to you. We might pause and take a few if it makes sense for the flow of our discussion, but if not, we're going to have some dedicated Q&A time at the end. So no need to hold on to them, just pop them in at any time. And let's get started with introductions. Maybe we could go Andrew, Carel, Kyle, and then Jill, if that works for everyone. So over to Andrew.
Hi, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. I'm Andrew Diroll-Black. I'm currently the Chief Compliance Officer of American Lending Centers. I've been doing that for about 3 months. Prior to that, I was working at the DHS Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. And then before that, I spent about a decade at the Immigrant Investor Program Office, where I started as an officer and worked my way up through the ranks to become the acting division chief of the compliance division. I helped build the compliance framework out for IPO. And one of my last acts before leaving there was to help implement the RIA in 2022. I was the leader of the project team that developed the 956 forms and the new 526E and helped lay the groundwork for what will hopefully one day be published regulations. I started off all this career as a immigration services officer in the New York City field office, where I did everything immigration that field offices do: green cards, marriage, children's citizenship, adoptions, all the things. And I love that work. I'm glad that I can do that on this side of the desk as well. Thanks. Carel?
Thanks, Andrew.
Hi, my name is Carel van der Merwe. I'm with EB-5 Coast to Coast, Sales Director at EB-5 Coast to Coast, and we own a portfolio of regional centers that cover the country, literally coast to coast. I think it's a dozen or so regional centers. We sponsor dozens of projects under those various regional centers. We're obviously in the thick of the 956G filing season at the moment, so I can't take much credit for that. We've got a really good team that does all of our compliance work, but happy to pass on some insights and feedback I've got from them.
Thanks, Carel. Over to Kyle.
Hi there, Kyle Walker, co-founder and CEO of Green Card Fund. We're a regional center based out west, cover about a half a dozen states. Started in EB-5 back in 2009 and work closely with IIUSA through the many turns of the program.
Kyle. Over to Jill.
And the only thing I would add, separate from JTC, is my position here is General Counsel for US and also the head of our specialty finance division. So I've been hands-on in determining what fund administration looks like for our teams that are based both on the East Coast and the West Coast. And we've worked on over 600 EB-5 projects to date. So kind of looking at what works, what doesn't, and how we can best guide our clients to the right end.
Awesome. Thank you all. Well, I say we just get into it with the first pillar. So this is reporting. So putting the business of running a regional center into the 956G annual form. And I thought Carel and Andrew could tell us some about that.
Yeah, I mean, I could kick off if you'd like, Andrew.
Yes, please.
I think, yeah, the 956G is obviously a lot more impactful, I think, than previous 924A, pre-RIA. It's really an annual integrity checkpoint. And as we know, the RIA is all about integrity measures. So I guess at a very high level, the way I see it is that it's show us where the money has gone, where it came in, how it was spent, and provide evidence as far as that's concerned. So invoices, receipts, bank statements, all of that. And then obviously it's also progress report on the project and job creation. And then, in addition, you need to disclose all payments to agents and third parties. So that's a huge enhancement as well. So USCIS clearly wants to know, who had a hand in the pot. Job creation is very helpful as well. We certainly encourage the projects we sponsor to actually use the economist to update the job creation numbers. And I know IIUSA uses this data as well to promote the program in general. So some very useful data. And then, of course, we're going to chat about it later, but there's the regional center has to certify as well as part of the G that all securities laws have been complied with, all relevant securities laws. And that certainly also ups the ante quite a bit in terms of compliance and potential repercussions for non-compliance. I also think that there's a lot of sort of overlap. I think that the G sort of overlaps with the 956F and backs that up to a certain extent. And it also feeds into the I-829 and audits, which we will discuss as well. It's a form that I think USCIS could use to check for consistencies across the project and monitor that. So it is, clearly a very important form.
Thank you so much, Carl. That's excellent background as to what we're dealing with. And I mean, Andrew, you were there, boots on the ground. Tell us about this form and why it exists, how it came to be, how adjudicators use it, what happens if you screw it up. Tell us all about that.
Sure. Yeah. The 956G in its current form really traces back to the fraud landscape that we were seeing in the early 2010s. There were a lot of regionals, as the IPO came on board in 2013, there was no concept of a compliance division, but we started seeing just large regional centers going bad. I think Chicago Convention Center, JP, a few others just started popping up in the news, and our chief at the time decided we need to do something about it. So we created a compliance group that started looking at regional centers really in depth for the first time in the history of the program. What we did in those early days was kind of create a menu or a shopping list of things we wanted to look at and problems we needed to solve. And the existing framework of forms at that time were just not sufficient. The 924A, I think, was 2 or 3 pages, didn't get into any kind of detail about what the regional center was actually doing, the status of any of the projects. And so it was not really a terribly useful form. We did have staff reviewing them. It was mainly just checking to see that they were filled out properly and see if there were any highlights that we could draw on to take actions. But the wish list of things that we wanted to do to get better insight as to what regional centers and the NCEs were doing was still out of reach. We tried to roll things out through regulation. We tried to roll things out through form improvements. But in the end, it was really the RIA that gave IPO the tools it needed to start actually getting some solid intel on what regional centers were up to. Like the 924A before it, the form exists by statute. There are a list of things in the RIA that says you must explicitly include. And when we got our team together to start designing the suite of forms, I think Carl actually sussed out, and I'm quite proud of my team for doing this, that we tried to make them all interlinked and work together. The G absolutely mirrors the 956 and 956F. It's meant to give the regional center the ability to track what it does from year to year to year, and then also give USCIS insights on, as he said, who has their hands in the pot, who's accepting payments, who is or where the money is going and how it's flowing through the regional center. Some of the problems we saw pre-RIA was a lot of mismanagement of funds. We saw a lot of things being just pulled together, diverting away from the projects that they were approved for. And the G creates a kind of accountability where the regional center has to put on paper and then certify that the way the money is flowing through its entities is correct. Carl hit it on the head as well. The main team that really looks at these is the audit team. There are analysts who will review them from time to time. If there are investigations or if we get inquiries from other uh, law enforcement agencies, regulatory agencies, then IPO will look at the forms in depth. But generally, it's the auditors who are looking at these. They're using this as a foundation for the kinds of questions and documents they're going to be requesting and to set the stage for what will eventually be the audit of a regional center.
No, thank you for that. And if there's a failure to file, or obvious failures on the form, do you have any insights on that and what it could mean if a regional center isn't on top of their G?
Right. So let me just say that the number one reason that regional centers get terminated is either failing to file this form or failing to pay their integrity fees. If you don't do the administrative thing that you're supposed to do, IPO will seek to terminate your regional center. I had kind of the ignominious award title of being the 15%er. I think it was 2018 or 2019, where I personally terminated about 15% of the existing regional center population because they had failed to file their 924As at the time. In some cases, we had let them go a year or two, gave them a little grace. But at that point, I think 2018 was when the compliance division was really in full swing. We decided to go ahead and do what we called the failure to file jamboree, and we wiped out all of the non-compliant regional centers. It was a sea change for how USCIS would deal with these cases moving forward. You can see now in the RIA that that is one of the absolute clearest reasons that a regional center can be terminated, and they take it seriously. So you see them every January, February. Once the mailbox is empty and the data has been input, somebody, usually a program analyst, will pull the data, make a list of who's naughty, who's nice, and hand that off to officers, and the officers will do the work. So if you're if you're not in compliance with that, expect to get a nasty letter come February.
Yeah, kind of the base administrative requirement. I can't believe it was formally named a jamboree. I mean, that makes it almost sound fun, but yeah.
For us, it was because it was a break from the routine. And what we do is the first one, we had the files, we had the actual physical files. We'd pile them all up in a file or a conference room, and then we'd assign piles of them, literal stacks of these files to individual officers to go through and make determinations. Because our data, I keep saying I need to change my pronouns. I've been out of the government now for almost a year. But their data is never good. And so there was a lot of manual checking to make sure that, this regional center did not file, to make sure that they don't have a letter in the file saying something happened. There was a case a few years ago where a law firm had sent us a letter because their offices had been damaged in an accident, and they were unable to get mail out during the Christmas season. So they asked for an extension. And that was something that it was on the chopping block. And when I was going through those files, the first thing I saw was a letter from, it was Robert Devine actually, had sent us a letter saying, hey, we can't file right now. We need some time. And they explained, and it was very clear why. And so we were able to give them a little extension.
So interesting. Thank you for that, Andrew. Carl, tell us about how you prepare for these filings and coordinate, especially across NCEs, and just any insights that you could offer our audience about preparing these forms.
Yeah, I'd say, we, as part of our agreement with the projects we sponsor, we actually require, that they provide us the information quarterly. I think that makes it a lot easier than scrambling, towards the end of the year. So we do also have deadlines and penalties that are built in and they're pretty strict deadlines and onerous penalties. So it does really concentrate everybody's mind on getting the data early, and so I think, we definitely make sure we try and stay on top of that because, as you know, there are consequences for all the projects under the regional center if one of the projects doesn't comply. So I think just staying on top of data gathering is important from a regional center's point of view. I think we also encourage the projects we sponsor to be as transparent as possible, provide as much information as possible. So, for example, it's unclear, I believe, whether you need to file an attachment 1 if you have no investors yet, but we do encourage every project to file that as well. So, just as much transparency and staying on top of it, providing quarterly updates, I think is what we sort of insist on.
Yeah. Yeah, quarterly would make it much less onerous come filing time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Andrew, what about you? Any additional notes on preparing now that you're on the in-house side
Sure.
that you could offer?
Yeah, so ALC for the most part has its own projects. We form and source our projects in-house. We do have a handful of projects that are sponsored in various regional centers because we also cover the entire continental United States plus Hawaii. And so we have a handful of projects that we have partnered with in the past. Those projects, I have a list of them I have to call this week to make sure they get their paperwork in. But Carl's right. You just want to make sure you have a good relationship with those other groups and make sure that the expectation is clear of what they need to provide to you and what those deadlines are. The other thing I will say is, generally speaking, if you have a project that's been filed, if you have a 956F that has either been filed or approved, that should absolutely be reflected on the 956G. If it's not there, that's one of the first questions that the auditors and the USCIS will have. Is why didn't you report anything on this? And the excuse of, well, we didn't have any investors yet, they will look a little leery about. It's something that's in the pipeline, it's on paper, so you should absolutely account for it. If you haven't filed the F yet, then it's probably not necessary to include it because it hasn't really hit USCIS's door. But it's something that you want to make sure that you have your templates and you have everything ready to go so that if somehow magically that project is ready to file on December 30th, that you can update your 956G and have it ready, have it updated as well. In terms of transparency, the statute gives a pretty straightforward laundry list of things that you need to include. Make sure you do all those things. Make sure you have at least a statement from your regional center operator that explains each point of those requirements. Where there's data required, and again, the statute's pretty straightforward on this, provide sufficient data. Doesn't have to be exhaustive. I don't think the statute is extremely clear on the level of detail that's required, but and without any regulations, it's very hard for USCIS to enforce anything on that. But I'll tell you that the way things have been changing over the last few months and definitely this year, the interpretation in USCIS tends to be very, very strict, or it's becoming stricter. So don't think, oh, we didn't submit it last year, it'll be fine, we won't submit it this year. If it's on the list, you should definitely include something that addresses each one of the points in 956 or in the subsection G.
Got it. Well, thank you. I think we've pretty much covered reporting. So let's turn to the second pillar, which is funding, and that's integrity fees, and look at how the USCIS finances its oversight infrastructure. And we'll have Kyle and Andrew kind of lead us through this. So let me kick it over to Kyle for pillar 2, which is funding with integrity fees.
Yeah, Mariza, I think you framed it right. How did they finance it, right? One of the important things about the EB-5 program has always been that the fees of the EB-5 forms really finance, what it takes to administer it. And with the RIA, obviously a lot more integrity provisions come in here. While site visits existed before, they weren't happening at a great scale. The RIA really mandated audits happen on every regional center within a 5-year period, and all these other things we're talking about. So these integrity fees, I think, became a really important mechanic for them to, recoup the expenses to carry the overhead, right? I think IPO is somewhere between 350 and 400 employees, depending on vacancies at any given time. there's a lot of overhead to take care of this. So integrity fees are important. They come around every October. I'm sure all of you have been dealing with this recently. So window kind of opens from October 1 to October 31, and you're going through pay.gov now and actually doing a digital payment. Um, Andrew, I'm not sure if you want to talk a little bit about the amounts and some of the other things about how this uh, came to. I've enjoyed your stories as we've prepped along the ways. So I'd be curious to hear the inside baseball as you guys were rolling out integrity fees and maybe why we can't use pay.gov to make digital payments for our other forms now.
One of one of these days I'll have to have a rocking chair in a porch with a big EB-5 handmade sign. EB-5 advice here. So yeah, the short version, the statute again explains the funding amounts. If you have a regional center that has fewer than 20 or fewer investors, the fee is $10,000 each year. If it's more than 20, then it's 20,000 each year. The the problem with the pay.gov is just that the entire government is still operating like it's 1991. I like to say that a lot of government websites are the best things that 1994 had to offer, and it's always a good laugh. But the underlying structure, if you want to go into the history of contracting for IT services in USCIS, it's scandal plagued. It's full of waste and abuse. We had contracts to digitize the 924 all the way back in 2014, and those things cost millions and millions of dollars, never panned out. You might remember LS1. There was a very short period of time where you could file 924s and 526s electronically. We accepted, I should say they accepted about 150 of those, and they lingered because there was not a portal for adjudicators to actually access and then adjudicate those cases. So when it comes to why does IPO now, why does the EB-5 system allow pay.gov payments? It's really because we've been frustrated. They'd been frustrated by it for a decade and been pushing leadership at USCIS to get that moving until finally we got a contract to start developing these online services. And because the fees are so large, USCIS leadership determined that it was worthwhile to finally get that portal up and running. So that's the short version. It's the fact that we are expensive. EB-5 is an expensive program to run, and so they're willing to spend a little bit of money to make sure the administration is solid.
So
You can't
I think back
get
to the previous points, if the fee isn't getting paid, terminations are rolling out. That seems to be pretty clear here. And then from a documentation perspective, we'll talk about it a bit within the audit, but I know for our organization, we're printing the digital page that comes after you process the payment. We're saving the email that comes back to us from the system, and then obviously the banking records on the other side to show that that payment was drawn from our account. So really trying to capture that payment from all sides, have the documentation if something is to happen in that system. We've had instances in years past where the email didn't come out and we had to rely on that web page printout, and all of these things kind of came to bear when we were having our audit conversation. So we'll talk about that here in a bit with the webinar, and I think maybe that's our transition point to kind of get to this verify pillar and
well,
what's occurring with the audit. But Andrew.
I would like to add one thing there. Again, because the systems tend to be so bad, it doesn't hurt to get all the documentation you can to prove that you made that payment. And while it's not necessary, if you have that ready to go, maybe include it in your 956G. It's just another place where you can say later on, if you're called to, oh, you didn't file this form, you didn't file the fee, then you can point to another filing that you made to say, I included proof of that when we submitted the G, go look at it, thanks, have a nice day. That way, USCIS doesn't have to wait for you to respond. You can just fire off an email and maybe send them the digital copies of it if they're willing to accept those. But then they might be able to look in their own files and say, oh, yeah, there it is. And off you go, I hope. The biggest problem is, of course, just people not paying it. If there's anything I can say, it's just like if you're in federal court, procedural correctness is number one. Make sure you do the things you're supposed to do. Pay on time, pay early, pay often, but just get all these things in the mail, get them paid as soon as you can, to avoid any kinds of concerns later on.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Kyle, if you want to take us over to the next section, and I think Jill's actually gonna kick us off on verifying. So this is audits and audit readiness.
Absolutely. So if anyone who's on the call today hasn't picked up on a trend here, there is an ongoing theme that what USCIS is looking for is reporting and transparency. And one of the pieces of the RIA that was new is that every regional center, at least once every 5 years, is going to have an audit. This has kind of evolved over time since the RIA was enacted. I think that comes from learning, just like AI and Chat GPT and all of those things, as they get more and more inquiries, they learn more and they figure out what kind of questions they're asking for. So since the enactment of RIA, we've helped a number of our clients prepare for audits. It was only just a week or so ago that actually we were invited to an audit. So my perspective has changed slightly, but I can say with certainty there are just a handful of things that are kind of vital pieces of information. It's going to start out in each audit with, tell me about the structure of your org chart. Who's a decision maker? Who has signing authority? What type of entity is this? And for regional centers that have been around for a long, long time, sometimes they haven't looked at those records in quite a while, and it may be time to give them a once-over. There may have been employee turnover, and the signers in your documents are no longer there. So being prepared early, can't say it enough, is going to be vital. Once the audit part gets through what I would say is the administrative stuff. How did you put yourselves together? What is your goal? How do you operate? Then they really wanted to drill down into day to day, how does it work? So who on your team is in charge of inputting investor information, for example? How do you verify it? Where did it come from? And then we spent a lot of time on the flow of funds. I think we learned from the original I-526s that source of funds and flow of funds is something that is really important to USCIS, and I think important to the EB-5 program in terms of the public's perception of this being a legitimate immigration program and a job creating program, validating that we're bringing in good people to the US economy and funds that are needed, especially now in underserved areas. This is our chance to show it. This is our chance to say, yes, for those of you who were involved in creating the Regional Center Pilot Program originally, and where you wanted to have reduced fees if investments went to certain areas, this is how we prove it's working. This is where it is. And so when we were sitting in the audit, it gave us as JTC a chance to talk to the 4 auditors in the room about, why does JTC do this? What is it that you bring to EB-5 that's different from a fund administrator who works in private equity? And so we walked them through how we focus on things that are both securities and immigration focused. There are a number of data points that a private equity fund administrator wouldn't spend time on, like job creation, like when are your derivatives going to age out, and what is your urgency? What does a backlog look like? So that was our chance to really say to USCIS, JTC is in as a fund administrator, and we care about the program and best practices, and this is how we do it. And it was that point in the audit where they really turned to my team and said, show me. And so they wanted us to open up our platform and say, when the investor money came in, here's where it hit. Here's the bank account and the funding information. Here's what we got from the origination bank. And when the money left the subscription account and went to the NCE, what were the requirements for that? And how do you actually validate that those requirements have happened? So it's really interesting to sit there and say, for as many times as we've had to push back on our clients and say, no, I need the backup documentation, this was our chance to say, wow, I'm so glad we've been asking for that, because now we're supporting our client in this audit. And when they ask us for a screenshot or they ask us to show an attached document, we had them. Kyle, I know that you've had some earlier audits than I was part of, and things were run a little bit differently. We talked a little bit about the length of the pre-audit visit request, and we talked a little bit about how your initial questions, you shook your head a little bit and thought maybe this wasn't what they should be asking. Why don't you take a turn and give us that perspective?
Yeah. First I'll make a plug for IIUSA, right? And one of the things that helped us prepare for our audit was the information sharing happening at IIUSA and being able to see some of the early audit letters and document request letters that were pushed out and kind of where those things have evolved. So just going into the process real quick, right? You're going to get this notification of audit initiation in the mail. And within that, there's a document request list. When I was looking at some of the earlier requests that were sent out to RCs, not our own, but shared through IIUSA, that list was about 13 items long if you look at Q1 of 24. My regional center went through an audit in Q1 of 25. Our list was now 24 items long, right? So that's your first step. You have 7 days to respond to that, to just say, hey, here are the point of contacts. We've received this. And then they're giving you about 14 days to respond to that document request. We had an interesting scenario where our counsel was actually out of the country at the time, and they asked for an extension on the document production. I have to say I wasn't terribly excited about that as on the client side, right? But they asked politely, and USCIS accommodated. I can't say they always will. I know we asked some other folks about that, and they said, "Oh, we asked for an extension, and we're told no." Right. So I do think these things evolve over time. I think one thing that was very clear in the process when we were in it was USCIS was actively hiring up to try to get to every regional center before the end of the 5-year period. And they were feeling that pressure, right? We were asking a lot of questions. We noticed during multiple phone calls, these were hosted on Zoom, that they would kind of bring in some new employees. And we'd ask, well, who's this new person on the call? And they say, oh, an auditor in training, right? And so I think they were very much feeling the pressure to get through all of these regional centers in the time. But getting into, the actual meat of the audit, one of the things that I think was really helpful for us, and I think Jill, you outlined it well, is we ended up being very detailed in our response to say, here was your document request, here are the links, here is an explanation, right? So we were very structured in our cover letter response. And then for the actual audit, which was done virtually over Zoom, we put together a PowerPoint presentation to create some structure to it and make it flow a little better. And you did start with, hey, here's the history of the organization. Here's the organization structure. Here's what's happened over the last 15 years, right? To kind of map them through that and address that. Then what we did is we went into our operating norms and kind of roles and process, right? So they could understand, here's how this stuff lines up to the policies and procedures that were filed for these regional centers back in the beginning and what they told us they do on a daily basis. And we're kind of showing how we operationalize that. And then we very much focused in on, here is the entire life cycle of funds and what our documentation package looks like at each of those steps for our investors, right? So we really built the scaffolding for them to understand, right? Here are historical filings. This is the organization. These are the policies and procedures. Here's how we bring them to life with people and process. And this is what that documentation template looks like. And then I think, Jill, to your point, that's when they are very, I would say 75–80% of the audit was focused on show me the money. Let's get into specific investors in specific projects, right? So I think at that project point, there was some conversation of legacy. And when I say legacy, I mean pre-RIA. It for the most part was just kind of like a status check-in. Here it is. They didn't focus a lot of their questions on that. They almost entirely focused on everything post RIA, right? So those newer projects. They then gave us a list of investors in each of our post RIA projects and said, for the remainder of this audit, let's go through each of those And they wanted to see documentation kind of at each step, right? Investors' money moving into escrow, out of escrow to the NCE, to the JCE, right? How are we tracking job creation? So really getting into those steps. As we were preparing for the webinar, I kind of told people one of the experiences, and I was curious if they were testing me or not, but in giving me lists of investors in a project, they actually gave me an investor that didn't exist in any of our projects. And I wasn't quite sure if that was a test, and kind of planted by design or just a record-keeping accident. But Andrew, I know you have a take on it, but it was kind of a funny moment in the audit that was otherwise pretty serious.
Oh, I'm glad it was fun because the staff that I know who run the audits and the officers who accompany them are always very pleasant, good, professional people, and they were probably horrified that there was bad data out there. If I could guess one or two of the auditors who was there was probably immediately like internally screaming when he or she found out that there was an error in what they had presented. But I'm glad everybody handled it well. The audit program, as it developed at USCIS, was challenged, just like everything else. When we were working on this structure, we were trying to figure out how we could get insight into what regional centers were doing and validate the things that they were providing us in the annual statements. Because if anybody's worked in immigration long enough, you know that almost every law office has had to deal with somebody bringing a fraudulent birth certificate to them and having to sort that out. Well, when it comes to financial documents, there is no standard. There's not some sort of document library you can check. And so IPO was really trying to find ways to get inside a regional center and look in their file cabinets to validate that these things were true. But prior to the RIA, there was no audit authority. So we'd hired a bunch of auditors, tried to get the audit regulation up and running, I think in 2015, and then everything kind of hit a wall. So we converted our audits to what we called compliance reviews, and they were very superficial. They were very low key. Show us how, your life cycle of projects, and there was almost no consequence if you said no. So compliance reviews were by and large voluntary at that time. We had just about finalized that process and made it regularized when the RIA hit. And so the RIA suddenly gave USCIS actual audit authority, but then no description of what that is or should look like. So we also, I think around that time, the lead auditor had taken off to a different agency. We hired a new guy, and he was hired thinking he was going to be doing these compliance reviews. And when he showed up on day one, I said, "Hey, let's build an audit program." And he definitely did not look as enthusiastic as he did the first hour and a half of the day. But that's what they've been working on. So from early 22 until 24, they were working very hard on creating policies and procedures that would work within the structure of the RIA without a regulation. And so that's something that, in terms of seeing the changes of the things that are being requested in these letters, it's becoming more formalized. It's becoming more regularized. And as the audit program gets some longer legs and gets more people ready to do the work, you're going to see a much more formalized, regularized process. And when the regulation comes out, hopefully it will mirror what they're doing now or doing in the near future. There is a little caveat there, is that it could become even more formalized and more structured in a way that becomes much more onerous and maybe less fun. But hopefully they're just kind of building out the program in the way that they think they can do efficiently and get the kinds of insights that they need.
Yeah, I mean, maybe closing out on our experience in the process. I mean, I think one thing, Andrew, I don't know if I would call my audit fun. We found moments to laugh, right? But look, I think it's important just from a tone perspective. I mean, these are people, right? They were very professional, but they were friendly enough. At all times we were trying to be very respectful, be, kind of forthcoming and lay these things out. This isn't an adversarial dynamic. And I think when you establish that respect in the beginning, they proved to be very reasonable. Another thing that we did through the process is, and, I would recommend to others is, in sitting in the audit, they would say, "Oh, we saw these things in the document production that you provided," right? Because what you're doing, you're getting that upfront notification. You produce that documentation, then you're having a conference call, and then you're going into that audit. Again, all of this virtual. And when we asked them, they said they were planning for the remainder of the audits through the end of the RIA to keep them virtual. I don't know if that's held, but Jill, I assume yours was all virtual.
Yes, it was all virtual. What I would add, though, is we've talked a lot about on the front end and the part that they give you to prepare. Um, Also, during the audit, we were given a list of 4 investors. They were not given ahead of time, and during the
Mhm.
call, they were asking, "Show me the life cycle of these certain investors." And what they were trying to do is pick some newer ones so that they
Mhm.
could see not only how the money comes in and goes to be deployed for job creation, but also how it gets paid back. And so
Right.
we did go through those 4 people, and it happened that one was a withdrawal, so that was a different case. One was brand new, so that was only subscribed, and one was very old and had been repaid. So it gave our auditor group a good view, but it still wasn't enough. And so after day 1, we came back on day 2 and they kind of said, "I think we've asked everything that we want to ask. We're going to put together your homework and we'll see you later." So we were on day 2 for about 30 minutes and we hung up. And what we got back was, "Show us how the communication flow goes." And they literally wanted to see how the fund administrator communicated with the regional center in terms of who knows when money has arrived, who gets to tell the other party, and what does that look like. And they said, "Show me the email, show me what it looks like and what's attached to it." So even if you have a great audit, as Kyle is talking about, very cordial, all getting along really well, there's still likely to be homework. As prepared as you are, that's intentional. It doesn't mean that you didn't bring something they wanted. It means that they now want to see different things that they don't need to be sitting in a room with you to see.
And I think
But I
that's an
think,
important point because when you're
yeah,
in the audit, it's okay to say, like, okay, I don't have that with me right now, but can we follow up on it, right? There's a period between the audit event happening and that closeout letter being issued, and there's some exchange going on during that period, right? So don't rush yourself into an answer that might be incomplete or you aren't comfortable with, right? Like use
for
that
sure.
period in between because they expect it. And I think to your point, Jill, it's likely going to happen regardless of how well the actual meeting goes.
It's
Yeah.
probably important to point out also that refusing to participate or if you impede an audit is another de facto cause for termination. So you want to make sure that you're playing along, that you're doing what is being asked, and that I think Kyle's suggestion is I don't have that today, but I will absolutely follow up is probably the best way to do it. If they find you to be combative, if they find you to be withholding things without good reason, then that's something that could potentially land you in some trouble and a possible noit.
Absolutely. I think we're getting close to our last pillar. So I'm going to transition now into certification. We're going to let Mariza actually contribute in this section because we've got both immigration compliance and securities law compliance. So I will get out of the way, Mariza, and I'll let you take that one away.
Thank you very much. That was so insightful. And before I talk a little bit about securities law compliance certifications, I have one question both for Jill and Kyle, and that's how many days did your audit last? And how many hours would you say, person hours, did it take to prepare for the audit?
Kyle, do you want to go
Ish.
first?
Sure. So our actual audit day, we ended up only going one of the 2 days.
Okay.
Um, I would say, Marisa, we over prepared by a pretty long shot. I wouldn't be surprised if we put in north of 80 hours on the front end of
Yeah.
that thing, right? We wanted it to be
Yeah.
very, very structured, very, very exhaustive. And I mean, we were building indexes of every, file in there and really kind of hyperlinking our story,
Mhm.
in that cover
Mhm.
letter or narrative. And then we spent a considerable amount of time on that PowerPoint. We went through kind of mock audits with our counsel, right? And went through those and adjusted it. So I went into it and, by the end I was like, wow, we probably invested twice as much, 3 times as much time as we really needed to, but I much rather feel over prepared than under.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
And I'd have a slightly different perspective. I couldn't say how much time our regional center put in ahead of the audit, As the fund administrator, though, we did spend some time as a team quizzing each other. If they
Mm,
ask you to see what, and we would have someone else on the team go to the page on the platform and access it, make sure everything linked correctly. So we did some legwork there. The actual first audit day, we spent probably 5 hours, but there were breaks in between. We took a break for lunch, so man hours probably down to 4. And day two, while we were scheduled for another 4, we used 30 minutes.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you. Well, we've got about 9 minutes, so I'm going to do my part on the quick here. And this is about securities law compliance certification. And this is a requirement that's on the 956G that I consider very unusual. And I know of no analogous requirements in any other program involving capital formation to put on the regional center that you've got to certify under penalty of perjury that you are in compliance with law, including all securities laws, which might apply to the offering. And so, as a securities lawyer, when we read this, we were fascinated by it and thought, wow, this is going to be really good for business. But I feel for the regional centers that have to take on that burden, particularly for a project that isn't their own. So if they're having to sort of oversee compliance for NCEs. And so I have a few thoughts on it, but before that, I'd love just to get Andrew's take on why was this included on the form and why do you think it's there?
So the reason it's included on the form is, of course, it's a statutory obligation, but the struggle is prior to the RIA, there were two reasons to terminate a regional center. One was failure to file the required annual form. The other one was failure to promote economic growth in all of its vagueness. What we were
Hmm.
seeing at the time in 2013, 14, 15 was regional centers that were violating their own terms of their business agreements, their private placement memoranda. They were upending securities laws left and right. And we worked very closely with SEC to target and analyze and support investigations related to regional centers that were doing bad things, moving money around, misappropriating. My personal favorite, buying yachts. There was a period of time we called certain regional center groups the Yacht Club because of it. So what we wanted to, this is actually probably came out of conversations I was a part of in 2013, 2014, 2015, where it's a little bit of a gotcha. If you're not doing it, it's grounds for potential termination. Because we ran into some cases where, despite the fraud, regional centers would persist through the appellate process because they were still creating jobs. Despite the
Right.
fact they were stealing money, despite the fact that they were buying yachts, they would still exist because they were creating jobs. So this
Mhm.
SEC requirement was something that came out of conversations with the SEC to basically get them to get regional centers in a position where if they weren't doing this, that they could be terminated. And so
Yeah.
the version of it that came up in the RIA was you have to certify.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you for that. And, you know, as a reminder on the securities laws, I mean, they exist to protect investors and to preserve trust. And without trust, folks are out buying yachts. And the EB-5 program eventually wouldn't attract very much capital. So the rules, the laws, the securities framework really keeps the market healthy enough to keep existing. And I think back 15 years ago, the early days of EB-5, when a lot of people thought of this as an immigration program that had some paperwork requirements, right? You got to have a business plan, an econ study, a PPM, whatever that is. Maybe without the full awareness that that's a very important securities disclosure document with a lot of implications if it isn't accurate. And so I do want to leave time for questions, and I could talk about securities laws and applicability to EB-5 for 5 days straight, but we won't do that today, other than to say that, you know, really connecting with your counsel on strategy, tying it out. What everything Kyle said was such music to my ears, in terms of over preparing and tying everything out. So the policy, matching the procedure, matching the paperwork. I mean, that's ultimately with strategy up front, what the securities law compliance piece is all about. And it is not a one size fits all. I mean, there are three main laws that apply, right? I'm sure most of you know the 33 Act, the 34 Act, the 40 Act. The disclosures have to be in place and accurate throughout the documents and throughout the life cycle of the deal. So that's where I could nerd out all day long. But just to say, if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. And so talk to your lawyer about that and just make sure that you're all on the same page with what's in those documents so that you're ready for the audit and you're ready to give that certification in good faith. So I will close us out.
Actually, could I just add one more thing about
Oh, you
kind of
bet. You
the
bet.
overall landscape? And I don't want to take too much time.
Yeah.
But when we started the compliance division, it was very much reacting to bad actors in the program. And I was very much a hammer, and every regional center was a nail. But as the compliance framework developed, and you see it baked into the RIA, a lot of these things, while interesting and weird and sometimes contradictory, are meant to highlight to regional centers things that they should be paying attention to. The ultimate goal of compliance is positive compliance. We want you to have a good program. We want you to have a solid regional center that can go out and create jobs. It's not always about punishment. And so this
Mhm.
is one of those things that highlights, as Marissa says, stuff you need to do. And so that's something that I think is baked into the RIA, and it helps create the landscape that we have now.
No, thank you so much, Andrew. Yeah, years and years ago, I gave one of these talks and I just kept thinking about the phrase, heavy lies the crown, right? So,
Mm.
so much opportunity comes with this program, but there are rules and they're there for a reason. So, I'm so grateful to all of the panelists. This was such an interesting discussion. I know Jill's got a little shout out she's going to give for our best practices committee, and then maybe Ashley has one. And then I don't see any questions, but we will open it up for questions after that.
Well, I will thank you, Mariza, for the chance to shout out. I've been a member of the IIUSA Best Practices Committee since 2013. So I've been through a lot of things with it, but I think one of our proudest production pieces is the frequently asked questions. So often members of our industry have burning questions they want answers to. What is happening, or how have you handled XYZ? And it's something that IIUSA put a lot of thought into in terms of how much certainty can we give without giving legal advice. And so I'm really proud of the frequently asked questions document that's available on IIUSA's website, because it does walk through all the big categories of questions, and it gets us as close to certainty as we can. And it's a living, breathing document. So as things happen, as things change, we're able to update sections of that and keep everything current inside. So I will encourage you all to get your IIUSA memberships paid up, log in, and take advantage of that library.
Thank you, Jill. Ashley, over to you.
Yes, and I should have put it up on the screen about the FAQs, but to access it, it is publicly available. We want everyone to use it as much as possible. So if you go to iiusa.org and then toggle over to the resources and data tab, it's on that drop down. So look for it there. And as Jill said, it's a living, breathing document. We have a group in the Best Practices Committee who is looking at it if there are any areas that we need to update. But if you see something that needs clarification or updating, please reach out to us to let us know so we can keep that a very helpful and useful document for everyone. I am going to talk quickly about IIUSA's data collection efforts, which kind of ties into a lot of what we were talking about today. Forgive me while I kind of read off of something here because my wonderful colleague Lee is actually the one who heads up these efforts, and he gave me some talking points for this. So we are encouraging all EB-5 stakeholders, whether you're a member or not, although if you are an EB-5 stakeholder, we would love for you to join us as a member if you're not already, but to share your data to expand our data set because we used to use FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, to get a lot of our data that we would use for our reports and just general information, but it has become an extremely stagnant process. And we have requests that are pending for 5, 6 years now. So it's not the most efficient way for us to get information. So we're really relying on the industry to send us the information we need so that we can collect all this, put it together, aggregate it, and really see what's going on out there and create data reports that are so useful to all of our members in doing their business. So we're really encouraging people to send us your data. And specifically, we're looking for, you'll see it there on your screen, regional center audit notices. We want to see what those look like, see if they're the same across the board, what people are asking for. Client NOITs. So if you're an attorney and you're getting NOITs regarding the integrity fee, we'd love to see those. Obviously, feel free to redact any identifying information. All of the information that you do send us is kept confidential. We're not sharing this or posting it to our website. We aggregate the information to create reports and find trends. So you don't have to worry about that going out publicly. And then we're also looking for processing times on 526Es and 956Fs. So sending that information over to us so we can see how quickly things are being processed or how not quickly they're being processed, depending on the case or the time. So if you have questions or you want to know how to submit this data to us, reach out to Lee. If you've been around IAUSA for really any period of time, I think you're familiar with Lee and all of his amazing work that he does. So his email address is there on your screen. Reach out to him. There are some forms that you can fill out, or some of it's just sending directly to him. So, and again, all this information is kept confidential, and we really appreciate and rely on this data sharing. I think everyone on this call has been sharing data with us, and we really appreciate it. So that is all I have on that. And I don't see any questions that have popped up. So I don't know if we have closing remarks or we're ready to wrap it up.
I think we're ready to wrap it up. It looks like Kyle might have something. Kyle, did you have a thought?
Just going to say thank you to IIUSA and Mariza. Thanks for organizing us.
Of course. Andrew, did you have a final
Yes,
word?
this is my first foray into the private sector since I've been in the government for 17 years up until this year. And it's been an incredibly welcoming and supportive experience. And this is my first webinar. So I'm so happy to be here, so happy to meet and work with all of you.
Thank you, Andrew. What about you, Carl?
Also, just thank you from us. It's been great being part of this, and thank you, Mariza. Thank you, IAUSA, and we're proud to be part of the organization.
Jill?
I will thank everyone as well. It was really a pleasure to be on this panel with such amazing information. I'm honored to be included in the group, and I thank you from JTC for all of the business you bring to us and all of the credit you give to the work we've been doing for all of these years.
Thank you, Jill. And I guess my final word is I think of us at the beginning of this compliance era in a lot of ways. So sharing information, understanding what's requested. EB-5 kind of came up in a time where those who knew didn't tell because it was a very competitive market. And I feel like we're entering a different phase of existence where we understand we're all dependent upon each other's success in some ways. And so I really encourage continued collaboration to let the rising tide kind of raise all of our ships together so that we can hopefully get permanent authorization of this program and continue to create jobs and capital formation here in the States. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all of our attendees. We really appreciate it. This is our last webinar of 2025. So thank you for your support. Thank you to JTC for your support of the webinar series. And thank you to all of the panelists. This was a wonderful session, and hope you all have a great holiday season and end of your year.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks.